Mm, that is a loaded question. A part of that is kind of also harkening back to those three things that I wish I knew before I started evaluation. Because what you're looking at here, like in terms of this article, right? You have a whole bunch of different things that can come into play when you're going to evaluate something, right? So with this in particular, you'd have to know like legal background and different stuff like that. But just to answer it from my perspective or what experience I have, um, gaming addiction is very much a real problem. And how an evaluation for a program that would be to maybe curb gaming addiction would depend, first and foremost, on who's funding it. Who is our client? Who are we trying to do this program evaluation for? Not in a sense of like who's going to benefit from it, but in a sense of who's the audience. Who are we trying to convince? Because usually, as evaluators or as clients, they're trying to convince someone to give them more funding for their program. So if we have a program that's going to be created to kind of curb gaming addiction, we have to essentially prove that the program is successful in reducing gaming addiction, and we have to prove that the investment and the money and the time and the resources put into that program is useful. So in terms of evaluation, it's just one of those things where you need to be knowledgeable. Not for me, I'm biased. I love video games. However, I've seen people get addicted to video games, and I know firsthand, not personally, but firsthand, how serious it can be. Just having that knowledge of understanding what it is about video games that draws people in, why it has an addictive sense to it, will help me personally as an evaluator because I'm within that culture. I'm a part of that culture. But my responsibility as an evaluator is to also be able to step outside of that and to see how, you know, gaming addiction and other stuff, just kind of just see how that just all encompasses people that are affected by it. So it's like, even though I'm in that culture, it's like I'm not completely in everyone's circles. I'm not the poster board or the end all be all of what goes for gaming addiction. And that is kind of one of the things that I've referenced back to before about the advice I can give to evaluators. You get a few points for being knowledgeable and being educated about whatever it is that you're going to evaluate, but when it comes to the actual evaluation, you got to have that ability to step outside of yourself. You have to have that ability to be mindful of the culture that you're about to evaluate. You have to be mindful of what funders are interested in. You have to be mindful about what program participants want to deal with or want to do. You have to be mindful of making sure that everyone's voice is in every part of your evaluation. It's hard work. It's hard work. So if I was asked to evaluate it, I'd be totally excited because I love video games and it's a topic that I'm passionate about. But at the same time, it would just be a lot of work as well as with any evaluation, just because of trying to keep in line with best practices. In terms, so if we have a situation where like it's on the honor system, right? So the issue with that in terms of evaluation is that there's no way on paper, right, to record what's going on. So as an evaluator, if you come in and this would be an instance where there would be a lack of data or there'd be an issue with data fidelity or things like that if you know in terms of that article, things are being done on the honor system. So, as an evaluator, what you would ideally want to do is to find a way to get some type of data from that. And that could be, sending surveys to, parents and be like, okay, well, how many hours did you allow your child to play video games or things like that? I think there's definitely it might look different just because it's a different culture, but that's definitely an issue of data. I feel like a lot of things always comes back to types of data, whether it's actual numeric data or whether it's qualitative data. Um, that's an issue of data. And there's a lot of different ways you can tackle it. I mentioned one, but a lot of times, that could also determine the quality of your evaluation. If you can't get that information about whether or not, you know, parents are really reducing video game hour time or something like that, you might be at a loss, and that's when you kind of have to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate what you're trying to evaluate. And that happens a lot. That happens a lot in the real world. I just had a project where I got onto the project, and everything that they had written originally had to be pretty much thrown out the window and restructured just because we couldn't get data from certain places. It happens, So to answer that question, it's kind of like it depends. It depends on the situation. It depends on the type of evaluators you have working on it, and their resiliency. Their efforts that they put in. If the powers that be allow them to have the resources that they need to do the evaluation properly, it just all depends. So like sometimes it's a kind of a perfect storm situation. That makes sense. So, all right, guys, I think that's all the questions we have for today. So I'm Megan Harris with CCNY. It was a pleasure answering these questions. Hope to see you guys soon at some point.